Now the trick will be to make sure the camera doesn't flip around. And while there's still no one here, no, it works. I'm not going to be looking at the chat so much because I'm just actually trying to read. And you can watch me do my thing if anyone's curious about how I actually do this. Except now there's a camera. If that interests you at all. Oh, and of course you have to set the quality to not 144p, because who would do that? I am in the midst, Ayn Rand bores me, I'm in the midst of reading volume 2 of Capital, and I just thought I'd go on here so you can see how I do this, because I get a lot of people asking me how do I actually do this process, except I'll have gin at the same time. So wear and tear is occasioned in the first place by actual use. As a general rule, the rails wear out in proportion to the number of trains. The wear and tear also increases by more than the square of the speed. If the speed of the trains doubled, then the wear and tear increases more than fourfold. A further item of wear and tear is that caused by natural forces. Sleepers, for example, do not just deteriorate as a result of actual use, but also suffer from rot. Fair enough. The cost of maintaining the road does not depend so much upon the wear and tear of the traffic passing over it as upon the quality of wood, iron bricks, and mortar exposed to the atmosphere. A month of severe winter would do more damage to the road of a railway than a year's traffic. Fair enough. So finally, as is the case throughout large-scale industry, moral deterioration also plays its part. After 10 years have elapsed, it is generally possible to buy the same quantity of carriages and locomotives for $30,000 as previously cost $40,000. A depreciation of 25% on the market price must thus be reckoned with on this material, even if there is no depreciation in the use value. Two bridges will not be replaced in their present form because there are now better forms for such bridges. Ordinary repairs, taking away gradually and replacing, are not practicable. The means of labor are for the most part constantly revolutionized by the progress of industry. Hence, they are not replaced in their original form, but in the revolutionized form. The fuck does that mean? Yeah, okay. On the other hand, the volume of fixed capital that is invested in a particular natural form and has to last out for a definite average lifespan within this is a reason why new machines are introduced only gradually and hence forms an obstacle to the rapid general introduction of improved means of labor. On the other hand, competition forces the replacement of old means of labor by new ones before their natural demise, particularly when decisive revolutions have taken place. Catastrophes, crises are the principal causes that compel such premature renewals of equipment on a broad social scale. The depreciation, apart from moral depreciation, is the portion of value that the fixed capital gradually gives up to the product as it is used, according to the average degree of its loss of use value. Okay. It's confusing stuff. to replace them. So in the production process, the means of production will be revolutionized and so may cause their cost to go down to replace them at the end of their cycle. But no capitalist interested in profit is going to settle for the old stuff. And will buy new, revolutionize things. Revolutionized equipment. To be competitive. That's a note. Yes, volume 2 of Capital. Thank you, chat, for doing my job. Okay, so depreciation apart from overs, portion of value that fixed gradually. Yeah. So this depreciation in part takes the form that the fixed capital has a certain average lifespan. It is completely advanced for this period of time, and after it has elapsed must be completely replaced. In the case of living means of labor, such as horses, for example, the reproduction time is prescribed by nature itself. Their average life as means of labor is determined by natural laws. Once this period has elapsed, the worn-out items must be replaced by new ones. A horse cannot be replaced bit by bit, but only by other horses, by another horse. Other elements of the fixed capital permit periodic and partial renewal. This partial or periodic replacement should be distinguished from the gradual extension of a business. Fixed capital consists in part of components yeah, literally just reading Marx. Yeah, you can't replace a horse bit by bit. Renewal. Other elements of the fixed capital permit periodic or partial renewal. This partial or periodic replacement should be distinguished from gradual extension of business. Okay, fair enough. Fixed capital consists in part of components which are similar but do not all last equally long. Yeah, and are rather renewed bit by bit at different intervals of time. Okay, the rails at a station, for example, have to be replaced more often than rails at any other parts of the line. The same is the case with sleepers. Lardner states that in the 1850s, on the Belgian railways, these had to be replaced at a rate of 8% per year. The whole of the sleepers thus being replaced in the course of 12 and a half years. Here the situation is as follows. A sum is advanced, for example, for 10 years on a particular kind of fixed capital. This outlay is made all at once, but a certain part of this fixed capital, the value of which has gone into the value of the product and has been converted along with this into money, is replaced each year in kind. Okay, while the remainder continues to exist in its original natural form. Yes. What distinguishes this fixed capital from fluid capital is precisely this outlay all at once and reproduction only bit by bit in the natural form. Yeah. So what that means, for those listening, is that in industry you can either have, in simple terms, fixed or fluid capital. Fixed capital is going to refer to the means of production, is going to refer to your factory, is going to refer to your equipment, your infrastructure, and so on. And when you buy this infrastructure, what you're doing is essentially you're going to have to allocate or figure out that cost of that thing and forward it to the product that you are producing so that you can cover the cost of that infrastructure, that fixed capital. So fixed capital doesn't actually bring new value to products. Instead, products just reflect their value. And as the thing degradates as the thing goes down in value, as it gets worn out, so too its value is going to be transferred slowly over to the product. Now, what happens then is that at each moment that the product, the fixed capital is being used, it is transferring some of its value while retaining some of its value. So there's almost a one-to-one relationship over a course of time. And this isn't just Marx saying this, we get this in Ricardo as well, and Smith. Where Marx comes in, though, is to say that fluid capital, which is referring specifically to labor, and there are some exceptions to this. Fluid capital is the kind referring to labor, isn't a one-to-one relationship between the value that the laborer brings to what goes into the product. In fact, there's more going to be extracted from the laborer than they are actually, able to give, or that they're actually earning. So that's how that works. So real value only comes out of real living labor. Other items of fixed capital consist of different types of component, which wear out and thus have to be replaced at different intervals of time. This is particularly the case with machines. The same applies here in connection with the life of these different components of one and the same machine forming an item of fixed capital, as we previously noted with respect to the varying life of different components of a total fixed capital. So the following should be noted in connection with the gradual extension of a business in the course of partial renewal. Even though, as we have seen, the fixed capital continues to function in its natural form in the production process, if a part of its value has circulated from the product, with the product, according to the average wear and tear and has been transformed into money, then this forms an element of the money reserve fund for the replacement of the capital when its reproduction in kind falls due. So what that means, is that as your machine wears out, it is transferring value to products that it's making. Let's say you are, with these machines, you're making, you're making yarn, you're sewing things, or you're sewing whatever. You make yarn. Let's say that's the end result. And then you're selling that as you go, and you're earning dollars. Now, a smart capitalist is going to be putting away some of those profits, some of those earned dollars, in order to, when the time comes, either completely repair or completely revolutionize, change out the machines that went into making this yarn. Otherwise, you're going to be screwed at the end of it, because if you've just been spending your money on your own interests, not actually paying attention to what's going on in terms of your industry, when it comes down to the end of it, when your machines have died, you're not going to have the money to replace them, and then you're going to be screwed. So this part of the fixed capital value transformed into money can therefore serve to expand the business or to effect improvements in the machines which increase their effectiveness. Reproduction then occurs in shorter or longer periods, and from the social point of view, this is reproduction on an expanded scale. Extensively if the field of production is extended, intensively if the means of production are made more effective. Okay, this is important qualification here. So reproduction then occurs in shorter or longer periods, and from the social point of view, this reproduction on an expanded scale. So extensively, this happens if the field of production is extended. So if you buy another factory, for example, but use the same technology, the same kind of machines. Or intensively if the very means of production you're using, instead of expanding them laterally, you make them more efficient. So renewal, use of profit as productive capital can be done extensively, which is, want to make sure I don't mix these up, lateral increase of business or increase of industry, or intensively increase of efficiency. I don't know how to spell. Okay, fair enough. Wow, a few people hanging on. I don't know if you're the same people then from 5 minutes ago, but who's ever here, I applaud you. Or whoever's here. Here, I'll take a second and look at chat. No, we're not at the beginning of volume 2. If those people asking are still here. We are on the chapter that fixed capital and circulating capital, which is chapter 8. I've been reading it for a while. Not in this sitting, but over a few days. Let me see. Any other questions I feel like answering? Learning what you learn in economics, yeah. Well, I mean, Marx was a brilliant economist, and it's too bad people are too caught up in their political nonsense not to understand that. A lot to be taken from Marx, or learned from him. So reproduction then occurs in shorter or longer periods, and from the social point of view, this is reproduction, so extensively or intensively. This reproduction on an expanded scale does not arise from accumulation, the transformation of surplus value into capital, but from a transformation of the value which branches into two parts and in its money form has separated itself off from the body of the fixed capital. The body without organs. He doesn't say that. That's not a quote. This reproduction on an expanded scale does not arise from accumulation, but from a retransformation of the value which branches into two parts and in its money form has separated itself off from the body of the fixed capital into new fixed capital of the same kind, either additional or more effective. Sure. So of course it depends in part on the specific nature of the business, how far and in what dimensions it is susceptible to a gradual addition of this kind, and thus also in what dimensions a reserve fund has to be built up in order to be reinvested in this way, and in what periods of time this can take place. How far improvements of detail to existing machinery can be brought about, on the other hand, naturally depends on the nature of the improvements and on the construction of the machine itself. Adams shows that this point is borne in mind very strongly. And from the start, in railway investments, the whole structure should be set out on the principle which governs the beehive, capacity for indefinite extension. Any fixed and decided symmetrical structure is to be deprecated as needing subsequent pulling down in case of enlargement. This in turn depends to a large extent on the space available. In some buildings, extra floors can be added, while others require horizontal extension and thus more land. While capitalist production is marked by the waste of much material, there's also much inappropriate horizontal extension of this kind, partly involving a loss of labor power in the course of the gradual extension of a business, since nothing is done according to a social plan, but rather depends on the infinitely varied circumstances and means with which the individual capitalist acts. This gives rise to a major wastage of productive forces. This is interesting. This is really interesting. I didn't... For those who need an image, just go to the suburbs and you'll see all the strip malls that are just developing horizontally, and then screaming there's a labor shortage because they pay them garbage, don't actually use labor productively or effectively, and they wonder why. Okay, that's interesting. Okay, so the impetus to expand produces situations where the notes I write aren't written very well, by the way. As long as I can understand them, that's what matters. So the impetus to expand produces situations where there may be be more demand for labor than supply. And so, and also the labor employed will be done so less efficiently. Which isn't surprising. I mean, one of Marx's really important points in all of this is just how bad capitalists are at doing capitalism a lot of the time, because they'll just comply to their own interests. They don't care. They'll form a monopoly if they had the chance, even though that'll completely skew the market and completely screw everything up. They don't care, which is totally against the basic tenets of, I guess, capitalist doctrine, if you take it from Ricardo or Smith. Very much would be opposed to what we're seeing happen now with like tech monopolies and various other oligopolies that just completely dominate the market, not necessarily off of because of merit, but because of greed, power. Okay, so the progressive reinvestment of the money reserve fund of the part of the fixed capital that is transformed back into money is easily effected in agriculture. Here, a spatially given field of production is capable of the greatest gradual absorption of capital. The same is true when natural reproduction takes place, as in the case of cattle breeding. Fixed capital gives rise to special costs of maintenance. A part of the maintenance is affected by the labor process itself. Fixed capital spoils if it does not function in the labor process. Yeah. The English law therefore expressly considers it as waste if land that is farmed out is not cultivated according to custom. Okay? This maintenance that results from use in the labor process is a gift of nature provided freely by living labor. In fact, the preserving power of labor is of a dual type. On the one hand, it preserves the value of the materials of labor by transferring it to the product. Okay, while on the other hand, it preserves the value of the means of labor without transferring this value to the product by preserving their use value through their action in the production process. But fixed capital also requires positive outlays of labor. If it is to be kept in good condition, the machinery must be cleaned from time to time. This involves additional labor, without which it becomes unfit for use. This is merely a defense against the damaging influence of the elements that is inseparable from the production process, and is thus keeping it in working order in the most literal sense. So the normal lifespan of fixed capital is naturally reckoned on the assumption that the conditions under which it can function normally during this time are fulfilled just as it is assumed. If the average life of a man is taken as 30 years, that he washes himself. What is involved here is not the replacement of the labor contained in the machine, but additional labor that is constantly necessary for it to be used. Okay. This is not a matter of labor performed by the machine, but of labor performed on the machine. Here it is not an agent of production, but rather raw material. Okay. The capital spent on this labor is part of the fluid capital, sure, even though it does not properly enter the actual labor process to which the product owes its origin. The labor must be constantly performed in the course of production, and so its value must also be constantly replaced by the value of the product. Yeah, the capital spent on it belongs to that part of fluid capital that has to cover the general overheads and is distributed over the value of the product according to an average annual calculation. As we have seen, in industry proper, this work of cleaning is performed by the workers for nothing during breaks, and for this reason it is often actually done during the production process itself, where it is the major source of accidents. This labor does not count in the price of the product. In this respect, the consumer receives it for free. The capitalist, moreover, does not have to pay anything for the maintenance of his machine. The worker pays in his own person, and this forms one of the mysteries of capital's self-preservation. constituting in point of fact a legal claim of the worker on the machinery. Okay, and making him a co-owner of this, even from the standpoint of the bourgeois right. Okay, or of bourgeois right. But in various branches of production where the machinery has to be removed from the production process for cleaning, and the cleaning can therefore not take place on the quiet, as with locomotives, for example, this maintenance work counts as running costs, as an element of fluid capital. A good engine should not run more than 3 days without being kept 1 day in the shed. If you attempt to wash out the boiler before it has cooled down, that is very injurious. Repairs proper, the work of patching up, require an outlay of capital and labor which is not contained in the capital originally advanced. Okay, I don't know if that is necessarily true, because if you had someone who was a capitalist, they would probably figure that cost into their initial estimate. They'd probably know when buying the machine what kind of a maintenance it required. But let's say, okay, fine. So the original capital advance is not going to account for this type of extra labor, this maintenance labor, apparently. So, and it can't be covered then by the gradual replacement of the fixed capital. If the value of the fixed capital is $10,000 and its overall life is 10 years, then this $10,000, when after 10 years it is completely transformed into money, replaces only the value of the original capital investment. This is assuming, of course, that this initial capital didn't account for the costs of maintenance, and does not replace the capital or labor newly added in between times of repairs. Okay. Apparently. I don't know how I feel about this. It just seems like a glaring oversight that an owner of industry wouldn't account for the maintenance required. It just that I don't know who would do that. I don't know. I can see like unforeseen costs. I can see unforeseen costs, but this stuff is. Although he's talking about repairs here, so maybe, because when a machine isn't working, or when, let's say hypothetically, you were to make a stock, like in your industry you made chairs or whatever, and you wanted to sell these chairs but they weren't selling, for every minute that these chairs are just sitting in stock, every minute that they're sitting waiting to be sold, they are costing you, because you're paying for the buildings they're in, any other maintenance they might need, if they need to be like a regular dusting or whatever, you're paying for that, but you can't actually forward those costs onto the final product, that is, onto the consumer. Because if you did, you wouldn't be competitive on the market, because the person down the road who made the chair just like the day before is going to be able to undercut you, because the same value has gone into it, but you feel like you have to cover more costs because, well, you do, because you kept it in stock for so long, so that you can't advance that onto the consumer. But anyways, he gives us this. So cost of repairs, like idle stock, apparently, I'm emphasizing this apparently thing, apparently can't be forwarded to consumer. So what this amounts to is how the capitalist is actually going to keep being capitalist. A capitalist is, they're just going to pay their workers less in all of this to account for these issues. I told myself in my head every time I read a page, or actually 2 pages because it's a PDF, I was going to look at chat. Let's see what chat says. I prefer to take notes physically. I have like 1,000 pages of notes. I'm not exaggerating. It's probably more actually. Marx would say there is a real difference between fixed and fluid capital. They do, but when he's talking about the distinction between fixed and fluid capital, he's not talking about like an ontological distinction. And what I mean by that is that no single object on Earth falls naturally within that domain. So he gives the example of cattle, and he says that cattle can be used as fixed capital, as like you use maybe a cow to help you plow a field, let's imagine, or you're using the cow to raise it and then use it for meat, in which case it would be fluid capital, or would fall into the camp of fluid capital or circulating capital. So the distinction between fluid and fixed capital isn't a very neat one, but it is a distinction that has real effects. You have to write a draft of your thesis on agency and deconstructing childhood. What do you mean deconstructing childhood? Like in the Derridian sense? How do you do that? I mean, childhood is only really the secretly the privileged term in the binary between childhood and adulthood. Okay, that pretty much goes all the way back. A machine isn't working fine, but this is true of a laborer, set of laborers who need maintenance. I'm trying to understand, given that there's some minimum payment to workers after which they die. No, yeah, and that's the minimum wage. The minimum wage in Marx's vision here is only going to be that minimum amount that they need to live, to be able to pay for their sustenance. You work in a chair factory? Oh my God. Funny what things, so many comments held for review. Oh dear. Oh dear. Some silly people out there. Okay, so we just talked about repairs, apparently how they can't be forwarded to the consumer. The damage to which particular parts of the machinery are exposed are by nature accidental, and hence so are the repairs. Oh, okay. So he's talking about accidents, things that can't be predicted. Okay, that's fair. However, two kinds of repair works can be singled out here, both having a more or less firm character and falling in different periods of the fixed capital's lifetime. Childhood infirmities and the far more numerous ailments of the years beyond middle age. What the hell is he talking about? The damage to which particular parts of the machinery are exposed are by nature accidental. Okay, easy. However, two kinds of repair works can be singled out here, both having a more or less firm character and falling in different periods of the fixed capital's lifetime. Childhood infirmities and the far more numerous ailments of the years beyond middle age. No matter how perfectly constructed a machine may be when it enters the production process, faults become evident with actual use, and they have to be corrected by subsequent work. Moreover, the more it passes beyond its middle years, and thus the more that normal wear and tear mounts up, and the material it is made of becomes worn out and weak with age, the more frequent and serious becomes the repair work needed to keep the machine going until the end of its average life. Just as an old man has more medical expenses than a man of his in his prime, if he is not to die before his time. Despite its accidental character, therefore, the work of repair is distributed unevenly over the various periods of the fixed capital's life. Okay, yeah, that seems... this is why new Fiats get good reviews. Give it 5 years, though, and you'll see what happens. It follows from this, as well as from the otherwise accidental character of the repair work on a machine. So firstly, that the actual expenditure on labor power and means of labor for repair work is accidental, as are the circumstances themselves that make these repairs necessary. The extent of the repairs needed is differentially distributed over the various periods of the fixed capital's life. Okay, so I really meant it when I said this was the most boring stream. Okay, it is however assumed in assessing the average life of the fixed capital that it is constantly maintained in working condition, partly by cleaning, which includes keeping clean its site, partly by repairs, as often as these are required. The transfer of value through the wear and tear of the fixed capital is calculated over its average period of life. But this average period is itself calculated on the assumption that the additional capital required to keep it in working order is continuously advanced. Fair enough. So secondly, it is equally clear that the value added by this additional expenditure of capital and labor cannot go into the price of commodities in step with the actual expenditure itself, which he's already explained. A cotton spinner, for instance, cannot sell his yarn dearer this week than last week because he had a wheel broken or a belt snapped. Because if he did, he wouldn't be competitive anymore. The general costs of spinning are in no way affected by this, because you remember in Capital Volume 1, he talks about like the socially necessary labor time. You can't just deviate from that because you have a bad work day or one of your machines just breaks once. It'll be impossible for you to be competitive. The general costs of spinning are in no way affected by this accident in an individual factory. Experience shows the average extent of such accidents and the work of maintenance and repair needed during the average life of a fixed capital invested in a certain line of business. This average expenditure is distributed over its average life and added in corresponding aliquot parts to the price of the product. And this is how it is replaced by the product sale. The extra capital that is replaced in this way is part of the fluid capital, even though the expenditure is of an irregular kind. Since it is of the utmost importance to treat every ailment of the machinery immediately, every large factory has, in addition to the factory workers proper, a staff of engineer, carpenter, mechanic, fitter, janitors, clean up messes, Their wages form part of the variable capital, and the value of their labor is distributed over the product. The expenditure that the means of production requires is determined according to this average calculation and always forms a corresponding portion of the value of the product, even though it is in fact advanced at irregular intervals, and so also enters the product, that is the fixed capital, irregularly. This capital spent on repairs in the strict sense forms in many respects a capital of a peculiar kind. It cannot be properly classed either as fluid or as fixed capital, but since it is part of the running expenses, it tends more towards the first of the two forms. That's interesting. So it cannot be properly classed either as fluid or as fixed capital, but since it is part of the running expenses, costs always coming up, it tends more towards fluid capital. Okay, so repairs and whatnot, or the cost of, fall under fluid capital. Okay, fair enough. I'll just write that. Okay. The way the books are kept does not, of course, affect the actual relationship of the things entered in the accounts, but it is important to note that in many lines of business, it is customary to calculate the repair costs in conjunction with the actual wear and tear of the fixed capital in the following way. If the fixed capital advanced is $10,000, its life 15 years, then the annual depreciation is 666 2/3. So if you did 666 2/3 times 15, you'd get 10,000. If the depreciation is now calculated over 10 years only, then instead of 666 2/3, it would be 1,000 is added annually to the price of the goods produced to compensate for the wearing out of the fixed capital. Because if you, just to put that in other words, if you buy a machine worth 10,000, and the machine lasts you 10 years, you should be earning $1,000 a year on the products that you're making and then selling in order to cover the cost of that machine. Okay, so then instead of 666 and 2/3, $1,000 is added annually to the price of the goods produced to compensate for the wearing out of the fixed capital. So in other words, 333 and 1/3 is reserved for repairs. That is if a third is allocated to that. The figures 10 and 15 are taken only for the sake of examples. So there's no basis. He's not using a real example. So this then is the amount spent on repairs on an average. The fixed capital may last for 15 years. Okay, there's a page done. Let me see chat. What's chat saying? I'm reading Marx. I'm reading volume 2 of Marx. Maintenance, yeah, it could be understood as health benefits in some way, shape, or form, sure. And that would fall under fluid capital. So the maintenance process can't contribute to the rise in prices of the commodities. Yeah, apparently not, Dallin. Apparently not. Yes, I am writing notes as well. Yeah, I'm making videos. Yeah. This is how I prepare to do episodes on things. This is how I don't read it out loud. That's the only difference. But I am just conveying to you out loud what goes on in my brain when I read things, and the notes I write that will eventually get translated back to you with gin. Anyone else like gin? There's only one right answer. Reading out loud does not help at all. In fact, hearing my own voice actually distracts me. I don't plan on reading Dawn of Everything. Bed 30 minutes ago. Go to bed. Colonial spirits. Yeah, there you go, Andrew. Yeah. Whiskey, huh? Yeah, gin tonic for sure. Fluid fixed. Where's the fluid fixed distinction coming from? Just if you look at any industry, how money is going to be allocated. Either it's going to be allocated on things that are going to stay there for probably a long period of time, things that you're going to have to maintain, or there are things that you're going to have to pay for regularly. So circulating capital is going to refer, or variable capital. There's a distinction there, but I don't want to get into that now. Variable capital is going to refer to the things that the money that you're spending on things that are going to come and go quite quickly. So labor, which requires a lot of turnover, you have to pay labor every week. It might also, as we've learned, fall under the domain of maintenance, other raw materials that you're going to need to buy repeatedly to match trends and whatnot. But then you have all the fixed things you don't really have to worry about, like the building you're in, like the machinery that will likely last a long time, that you just put down one cost, what you paid for once, and you hold on to it for a while. That requires a count of time. Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. That does require an account of time, and it's one that can often be difficult to predict. You could hire a worker, but even though you don't know how long you'll have the worker for, just given the way that wage labor works in all settings, you're going to be paying them every week or every 2 weeks, whatever the schedule is, and they can leave at any point, ostensibly. Yeah. I don't know about that, Albert. That'd be interesting. Yeah, get an answer to that. And I'm going to continue on here. Talk amongst yourselves. Where's everyone from? This then is the amount spent on repairs on an average so that the fixed capital may last for 15 years. So the calculation does not, of course, prevent the fixed capital and the additional capital spent on repairs from forming different categories. On the basis of this way of calculating, it has been assumed, for example, that the lowest cost estimate for the maintenance and replacement of steamships would be 15% per year, a reproduction time of 6 2/3 of a year. In the 1860s, the British government compensated the Peninsular and Oriental Corporation at an annual rate of 16%, which assumes a reproduction time of 6.25 years. In the case of railways, the average life of a locomotive is 10 years, but if repairs are included, the depreciation is taken as 12.5%, which reduces the lifespan to 8 years, because 12.5 times 8 is what we'll get up to that 100%. For passengers, coaches, and goods wagons, 9% is reckoned, so that's 11 years. He's just talking here about how long fixed machinery or your infrastructure, your equipment, whatever, how long that'll last once you know its rate of deterioration. So in connection with contracts of rental for houses and other things that are fixed capital for their proprietors and are rented out as such, legislation has always recognized the distinction between normal deterioration produced by time, the influence of the elements in normal wear and tear, and the occasional repairs that are necessary from time to time for maintenance in the course of the normal life of a house and its normal use. As a rule, the first fall on the landlord, the second on the tenant. Repairs are further divided into ordinary and substantial. The latter represent in part a renewal of fixed capital in its natural form and also fall on the landlord unless the contract expressly states the opposite. Thus, in English law, for example, a tenant from year to year on the other hand, is not bound to do more than keep the premises wind and water tight, when that can't be done without substantial repairs, and generally to do repairs coming fairly under the head ordinary. So even with respect to those parts of the premises which are subject of ordinary repairs, regard must be had to their age and general state and condition when he took possession, for he is not bound to replace old and worn out materials with new ones, nor to make good the inevitable depreciation resulting from time and ordinary wear and tear. Fair enough. Something that is quite different both from the replacement of wear and tear and from the work of repair and maintenance is insurance, which relates to destruction by way of extraordinary natural events, fire, flood. This must be made good out of surplus value and forms a deduction from it. Considered from the standpoint of the whole society, there must be a constant overproduction. Production on a... there has to cover all these added costs. Okay, so how does he characterize rent? Because I read a whole kind of chunk of a point, and then I go back and I take the requisite notes out of it. Rent falls under fixed capital for both renter and landlord, although their duties in terms of repairs vary. What page is this? 256. Okay. Something that is quite different from the replacement of wear and tear and from the work of repair and maintenance is insurance, which relates to destruction by way of extraordinary natural events, so this must be made good out of surplus value and forms a deduction from it. Considered from the standpoint of the whole society, there must be a constant overproduction, that is, production on a greater scale than is needed for the simple replacement and reproduction of the existing wealth, quite apart from any increase in population, for the society to have at its disposal the means of production needed to make good unusual destruction caused by accidents and natural forces. Okay, to compensate for repairs, insurance, accidents, etc., there must be an overabundance of a value of value / wealth produced, or valorized, extracted, whatever. So in actual fact, only a very small part of the capital needed for replacement exists in the money reserve fund. The most significant part exists in the extension of the scale of production itself, which is partly an actual expansion and partly falls within the normal capacity of the branches of production that produce fixed capital. An engineering works, for example, is organized to take account of both an annual expansion of the factories of all its customers and the need of part of them for reproduction as a whole or in part. When wear and tear and repair costs are determined on a social average, great unevenness necessarily arises, even for equally large capital investments in the same branch of production which are under otherwise similar circumstances. In practice, a machine will last one capitalist longer than the average period and another capitalist not so long. Right. The repair costs of the one are above the average, those of other are below it. But the addition of the price determined by wear and tear and by repair costs is this. But the addition of the price determined by wear and tear and by repair costs is the same in both cases, and it is determined on the average. Thus, the increase in price brings the one more than he actually added and the other less. Yes, and because one capitalist can't be charging more based on their own. They have to charge based on the socially necessary labor time. So one is going to get screwed, the other one's going to make more, naturally. Thus, the increase in price brings the one more than he actually added and the other less. The circumstance, like all others that lead the profit of different capitalists in the same line of business to differ, given the same exploitation of labor power, helps to make insight into the true nature of surplus value more difficult. The boundary between what is repair and what is replacement, between costs of maintenance and costs of renewal, is a more or less shifting one. This gives rise to a perpetual struggle. In the railways, for example, as to whether certain expenses are repairs or replacement, whether they are to be met from current expenditure or from the original capital. The transfer of repair costs to the capital account instead of the current account is a well-known device through which railway directors artificially rack up their dividends. Right? Okay. Here too, experience has already provided the most fundamental reference points. The subsequent works undertaken during the early life of a railway, for example, ought not to be denominated repairs, but should be considered as an essential part of the construction of the railway, and in the financial accounts should be debited to capital and not to revenue, so it doesn't screw their profits. They just forward it back to the company. And not being expenses due to wear and tear or to the legitimate operation of the traffic, but to the original and inevitable incompleteness of the construction of the line. The only sound way is to charge each year's revenue with the depreciation necessarily suffered to earn the revenue, whether the amount is actually spent or not. Which makes sense that they would, I don't know why they wouldn't always do this. They would factor that into their initial cost and then it wouldn't be an issue. But it's difficult to actually anticipate these things. Let me check chat then. Let me see what chat is saying. A lot of Marx's idea about the realm of necessity, the realm of freedom, the socially available free time are discussed by Martin Hagelin. It always feels curious to me when Marx gives examples. It really hits home. Yeah, it really does. Because capital is very much different now. Andrew, there's really no, it's so impossible to actually follow it. And this is why, in my opinion, Marx was just so brilliant. Because at the time, I mean, he didn't have the internet to figure out all this stuff. He was just typing away in that British library there, just trying to figure this out, or wherever he was. Yeah. Oh, okay. That's interesting. Todesbuist? I wish I knew how to share screen. I on my computer here, because I have my camera and I could share the screen here, but I'm pretty tech deficient. I don't know how to do a lot of things, unfortunately. I'm a tech pariah. I'm a little bit of a, yeah, I don't really know much about it. And now my light is going a little haywire. Hopefully that'll correct itself in a moment. Might get varying light outputs here. What was that question? That looked complicated. Am I going to be able to answer this? Let me see. Where the hell am I? Okay, so the issue of fixed fluid is that humans die on a shorter time frame than our artifacts cease to be operable, but everything breaks, so we make too much. Yeah, technically everything is circulating capital. Like, there's nothing that's going to last forever. So this is complying to, human-centered time frames. What are you going to have to pay for on a consistent basis versus what are you going to have to just like pay down a lump sum for and it's going to last you a long time? But the fluid is necessary to give the fixed value. You need both. You can't just have fixed or fluid capital. You need fluid capital to go to labor because you need labor to actually put fixed capital to use, which is like machines. Fixed capital can't do it on its own. And neither can fluid capital. You need to have tools, or else you're not going to be able to produce anything, like or raw materials. Like you can't just put humans in a room and be like, make value. They need some kind of equipment. But yeah, I'll let someone figure out my conundrum. Maybe there's some kind of way, maybe in the future, where I could have one camera, my phone, filming here, and then I could have like a little square like here with like the actual thing. My share screen, you could follow along. Or I can make you watch me play chess and lose, which is what happens a lot. I'm a loser. My strategy in chess is losing. I trip up my opponents by playing badly. Okay, so the only sound way is to charge each year's revenue with the depreciation necessarily suffered during the revenue, whether the amount is actually spent or not. Yeah. In agriculture, it becomes in practice impossible and meaningless to separate the replacement of the fixed capital from its maintenance, at least insofar as steam power is not yet used. Where there is a full, though not excessive, stock of implements of agriculture and other implements and appliances of all kinds, the general rule is to estimate the annual wear and tear together with the maintenance of the implements according to the different conditions obtaining at 15 to 25% of the original capital. Okay. In the case of railway rolling stock, it is quite impossible to separate repairs from replacements. Okay. We maintain our stock by number. Whatever number of engines, we have to maintain that. If one is destroyed by age and it is better to build a new one, we build it at the expense of revenue. Of course, taking credit for the materials of the old one as far as they go. There is a great deal left. They are the wheels, the axles, the boilers, and in fact, a great deal of the old engine is left. That was from someone named T. Gooch. And the quote continues here, repairing means renewing. I do not believe in the word replacement. Once a railway company has bought a vehicle or an engine, it ought to be repaired and in that way admit of going on forever. Continues here, the engines are maintained forever out of this 8.5D. We rebuild our engines. If you purchase an engine entirely, it would be spending more money than is necessary. Yet there is always a pair of wheels or an axle or some portion of the engine which comes in, and hence it cheapens the cost of producing a practically new engine. I am at this moment turning out a new engine every week, or practically a new engine, for it has a new boiler, cylinder, or framing. So the same With carriages, this is another quote now. In the course of time, the stock of engines and vehicles is continually repaired. New wheels are put on at one time and a new body at another. The different moving parts most subject to wear and tear are gradually renewed, and the engines and vehicles may be conceived even to be subject to such a succession of repairs that in many of them not a vestige of the original material remains. Even in this case, however, the old material of coaches or engines are more or less worked up into other vehicles or engines, and never totally disappear from the road. The movable capital, therefore, may be considered to be in a state of continual reproduction, and that which, in the case of the permanent way, must take place altogether at a future epoch, when the entire road will have to be relaid, takes place in the rolling stock gradually from year to year. Its existence is perennial, and it is in a constant state of rejuvenescence. The process depicted here by Lardner, in the case of the railway, does not apply to an individual factory, but it does provide a picture of the constant partial reproduction of the fixed capital. Constant partial reproduction of the fixed capital. Always has to be renewed in some way, shape, or form. Shot through with repairs that takes place within an entire branch of industry or generally within production as a whole, considered on the social scale. Here is some evidence of the broad limits within which clever directors can manipulate the concepts of repairs and replacements in the interest of their dividends. According to the above-quoted paper by R.P. Williams, various English railway companies annually wrote off the following average sums over a number of years for repairs and maintenance of the permanent way of buildings for each mile of track. Okay, so here we go. We got a list. London and Northwestern 370, Midland 225. London and Southwestern 257, Great Northern 310, Lancashire and Yorkshire 377, Southeastern 263, Brighton 266, Manchester and Sheffield 200. These differences arise only to a very slight degree from variations in the actual expenditure. They are almost exclusively due to differing models of calculation according to whether items are debited to the capital account or the current account. Williams says in so many words that a lesser charge is put down when this is a necessary good for a dividend, and a higher figure when there is a greater revenue able to bear it. In certain cases, the wear and tear and thus replacement for it is in practice of an infinitesimal magnitude, so that it is only repair costs that come into the balance. What Lardner says about works of art in the case of the railways holds good, generally for all similarly durable works such as canals, docks, iron, and stone bridges. Oh, wait, I'm almost at chapter 9. I was about to stop there. I got to continue to chapter 9 then. So he continues that wear and tear, which being due to the slow operation of time acting upon the more solid structures. I'm going to finish this page, and then I'll hang out for a few more minutes. So figure out something you want me to do or talk about. That wear and tear, which being due to the slow operation of time acting upon the more solid structures, produces an effect altogether insensible when observed through short periods, but which after long intervals of time, such, for example, as centuries, must necessitate the reconstruction of some or all even of the most solid structures. These changes may not unaptly be assimilated to the periodical and secular inequalities which take place in the movements of the great bodies of the universe. The operation of time upon the more massive works of art, upon the railways, such as the bridges, tunnels, viaducts, etc., afford examples of what may be called the secular wear and tear. The more rapid and visible deterioration, which is made good by repairs or reconstruction effected at shorter intervals, is analogous to the periodic inequalities. In the annual repairs is included the casual damage which the exterior of the more solid and durable works may from time to time sustain. But independently of these repairs, age produces its effects even on these structures, and an epoch must arrive, however remote it be, at which they would be reduced to a state which will necessitate their reconstruction. For financial and economic purposes, such an epoch is perhaps too remote to render it necessary to bring it into practical calculation, and therefore it need here only be noticed in passing. That was all a quote. This applies to all similar works with a long span of life, so that the capital advanced in them does not have to be gradually replaced or in accordance with its wear and tear. But it is only the annual average costs of maintenance and repair that are transferred to the price of the product. Yeah. Even though, as we have seen, a large part of the money that flows back to replace the wear and tear of the fixed capital is transformed back into its natural form annually, or even more frequently, each individual capitalist still needs an amortization fund for the part of the fixed capital that reaches its term of reproduction only after a period of years, and then has to be replaced entirely. A significant component of the fixed capital excludes piecemeal reproduction by its very nature. Apart from the case where reproduction takes place bit by bit in such a way that new stock is added to the depreciated old stock at short intervals, a prior accumulation of money is necessary. So there has to be a stock prior to, of a greater or lesser amount according to the specific character of the branch of production in question before this replacement can occur. This cannot be just any sum of money, whatever. An amount of a certain size is required. If we consider this exclusively on the assumption of simple money circulation, without any regard to the credit system, this will be bought in later. Then the mechanism of the movement is as follows. In the first volume, Chapter 3, 3a, it was shown that although part of the money present in a society lies fallow in the form of a hoard, while another part functions as means of circulation or as an immediate reserve fund of directly circulating money, the proportion in which the total quantity of money is divided between hoard and means of circulation constantly alters. In our present case, money that has to be accumulated on a large scale as a hoard in the hands of a big capitalist is thrown into circulation all at once on the purchase of fixed capital. It is then divided up again in the society between means of circulation and hoard, by way of that amortization fund in which the value of the fixed capital flows back to its starting point. In proportion to the wear and tear, part of the money in circulation again forms a hoard for a longer or shorter period of time in the hands of the same capitalist whose hoard was transformed into means of circulation and separated from him with the acquisition of fixed capital. There is a constantly changing distribution of the hoard existing in a society, which alternately functions as a means of circulation and is then again divided off from the mass of circulating money as a hoard. With the development of the credit system, which necessarily runs parallel with the development of large-scale industry and capitalist production, this money no longer functions as a hoard but as capital, though not in the hands of its proprietor, but rather of other capitalists at whose disposal it is put. Right, okay. So the possibility to mitigate issue of repairs is largely contingent on a hoard of wealth that is anticipated for future productive use. Okay, fair enough. Now that's chapter 9. Okay, chapter 9. The overall turnover of the capital advanced. Turnover of the capital advanced. Turnover cycles. Okay, I'm going to stop that there because my brain is turning to mush. But that's how I do this. For anyone, the few people who have remained, that's how I do this. This whole note-taking process. How does this all apply if you have an opinion in the ideal fate? Okay, Marx was anything you get into this guy. What is... was Marx a gin guy or whiskey guy? I have no idea. What did I write my thesis on? I wrote my master's thesis on Baudrillard and posthumanism. How does this all apply if you have an opinion to the ideal fixed capital, which sort of can't degrade, say the design of the steam engine as opposed to an actual engine? Well, it'll still degrade with time, and it'll still not add value for Marx at least. Well, I don't know how it would add value, because it would just, the way that it would actually force itself or end up in the final product will just reflect the cost, assuming that costs are an adequate reflection of the value gone into it. This is your Saturday night, Ruth Power. I'm sorry to hear that. What gives me motivation to push through the dry parts? I don't know. I think there's something wrong with me. I don't know. Because it's boring. I'm just I just have to understand it. I have to know. People name drop this shit. I'm like, I have to know what, yeah. I have to know. I personally skim through most books as I read first and last page of every chapter, and more if I need to. That gives me a general idea. That works. That doesn't clarify anything, Matt, but I'll take it. Okay. I gotta go soon, like physically leave, but I gotta figure out, I gotta look at my bus schedule and figure that out. Take that proletariat chariot, you know? DeBoard, yeah, one day I'd like to. I would like to one day. Where am I going? I'm going from my house to another house. I don't even know. Where's the address? I'm going to Warncliffe and right, okay. I got 5-6 minutes. Anyone have any questions? I got a couple of minutes. Anything you want to know? Happy to hear it, Matt. Yeah. This stream was not dedicated to answering questions. But if anyone has any now, I'll take them. GG. I say that a lot after I lose chess games. I do not do this regularly. I just often get asked what my process is like, and maybe someone will get a kick out of this. It'll help them. I don't know if my glasses? I actually got new glasses. These aren't them. I'm waiting for my new ones to be ready. But yeah. I was reading Marx's Capital Volume 2. Aw, thanks, Mary. It's very nice of you. Happy to hear it, Sandra. Thanks, Sadis. Maybe I'll do this more regularly. I don't know. We'll see. I could stream myself. I could play guitar if anyone wants that. Probably want that less than you want this, but you know, there's that. Could I read poetry? Hypothetically. Yeah, those are good suggestions, Mary. Florida Rich, for sure. Rupi Kaur, maybe. Room tour video. I'm not in my nice apartment. I don't know, whoever follows me on Instagram would see that I have a nice apartment. I'm not in it right now. I'm in a basement. Hi, Prerna. I'm in a basement, and it's horrible. It's terrible. The text was Capital Volume 2, Lost in Time. For those popping on now, I just have a minute. If you have any questions, you can shoot them my way as I get prepared to leave. Send me your favorite. Whoa, shit. I lost that. I was reading one. How ideal would you say your content is for someone who's mildly nerdy in philosophy but has no intention of studying it seriously like me? I don't know. It might be helpful. It's better to read this stuff, obviously, but which reading of Nietzsche do you agree with the most? I'm guessing Deleuze. I haven't read Deleuze's book on Nietzsche. I haven't read that many takes on Nietzsche. Peter Adamson, I'm not familiar. Unfortunately, Imagination Scene. Yeah, or if anyone has any recommendations, what should I do in future streams? If anyone, wants to share their opinions. Any tips on going through text without spending hours? Yeah, Spark Notes. If that's what you want to do, Spark Notes is the best way to do it. Let's be real. Or Wikipedia. I mean, chances are you'll get what you need there. I don't know how well that'll hold up to actual expertise in that. If you want to debate someone who actually knows their stuff, you might get screwed, but I haven't read Lenin yet. What is it, State and Revolution or something? I haven't read any Lenin. I'll get there. I want to get through Marx first, and then I'll do Lenin, and then I'll do the yeah. I think you should make your own opinion about Nietzsche. Just read it, and yeah, there you go, Mary. I mean, that's good. Those are good. Good tips. Good tips. Yeah. I like Althusser. No problem with it. I think I've only done one short little thing on Althusser on ideology maybe on this channel, but nothing. I haven't done a whole lot on him, which is, I should do more. Okay, my loves. On that note, I better go. It was nice of you to chime in here. I hope I was helpful to some of you. Yeah. Yeah. For those of you that haven't already, you can go follow me on other things like Instagram if you want. I don't really post on Twitter, but yeah. Epistemological split. Which epistemological split? Aw, thanks, Star. It's very nice of you. Bye, everyone. Have a good Saturday. If it is Saturday for you now. Stay safe and thrive. If I can